Good evening. My name is Anne Kenrick and I'm the Master of the Charterhouse. And I'm simply thrilled to welcome all of you joining us from around the country and indeed from as far afield as Australia and America. I am absolutely delighted to welcome you to our major renovation project, the Beautification and Refreshment of the Great Chamber. And I'm standing here in the antechamber, just outside of the Great Chamber. I'd particularly like to welcome those of you representing the funders and the generous donors that made this project possible. We are incredibly grateful. Of course, COVID-19 has foiled our plans to open the doors to the wonderful Great Chamber to visitors thus far. As an almshouse, our priority has to be the health and well-being of our residents, the brothers, and to protect them, we have kept the site closed since March this year and will only be opening it when it's safe to do so. But the project has been, for us, frankly, a beacon of hope during those dark days. Works were held up for a while when we had full lockdown, but the team of skilled builders, great artisans and experts have all brought this scheme to life, and we've watched enthralled in sheer delight. I have to say, one of the brothers said to me the other day, when she went into the room, she literally felt goosebumps. So this evening, you'll hear from a number of the key players who've been involved in the project, giving their perspective on how it's been evolving in creating the Great Chamber. And of course, you will exclusively be seeing it for yourself. Looking ahead, we have a whole program of tours, community engagement, exhibitions and events lined up. Many of these are, of course, virtual, but others will happen on site as soon as it's safe to do so. And there are, of course, dedicated resources now live on our website, so do take a look at that. Now, the Great Chamber has witnessed some great moments of this nation's history during its 500 or more years. It has always been the jewel in the crown of our extraordinary site here on the edge of the city. So who more appropriate to, as it were, cut the ribbon and launch the new room than William Russell, the Lord Mayor of London, who has incredibly kindly agreed to be with us in person at the Charterhouse this evening to formally reveal the Great Chamber in its new incarnation. So the Lord Mayor will now say a few words before we open to the Great Chamber. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne. Welcome to this ceremony for the opening of the Great Chamber of the Charterhouse following its restoration. I am Alderman William Russell, the 692nd Lord Mayor of the City of London. As a member of the Charterhouse's Development Committee, I am very excited to see the success of this project in person. As London's only surviving Tudor Great Chamber, having been used by such grandees as the Duke of Norfolk and Queen Elizabeth I herself, in my view, it is one of the most splendid rooms in London, if not in the whole country. When I consider the history of the Charterhouse and all it's been through, monks, martyrs, manor house, schoolhouse, almshouses, it makes some of the City of London's buildings seem young. Now, I understand this magnificent space has been restored to its former glory. So let's see if it is a room fit for a queen once again. I hope, as I'm sure we all hope, that visitors will be able to enjoy it and appreciate its majesty for themselves soon. There are many people who deserve thanks for this work. Thanks to our generous donors, including the National Lottery Heritage Fund, thanks to the Master, the Great Chamber Steering Committee, and all those who gave expert advice. Thanks to conservation architect Richard Griffiths and to other members of the design and project team. Thanks to the brothers for their patience and guidance. And thank you to Dominic Tickell, the development director, and his staff. Congratulations to everyone who has made this possible. I am sure the Great Chamber will be part of the fabric of London life for many, many years to come. Thank you.
And thank you, William. William is now digging out his mask so that we can together reveal the great chamber. Thank you. Take a handle.
Okay, there we go. The great chamber.
Thank you. Without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Dominic Tickell, the mastermind behind this project as our development director, who will tell you more about the project's objectives and how it was crafted and funded. Thank you, Dominic.
As Anne said, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the project. The word objectives always worries me a little. But I suppose the real objective of this project, just as it was with revealing the Charterhouse, which most of you will know about, is the sort of work on an historic site, the refreshing the whole of the Charterhouse so that it's fit for purpose as we go into the next 400 plus years. This project started when Tim Knox, who is now the director of the Royal Collection, but was then running Sir John Soane's Museum. Tim came to, very kindly, I can't remember how I managed to persuade him to come and have a look around the Charterhouse when nothing had been done. This is way before revealing the Charterhouse or anything. And he just looked at our paintings collections and this room and just said, you know, really, you should probably move those pictures in here. Now, most of you will know that actually they were in what was a long gallery on the other side of the estate, which was part of the Master's house until the First World War, and they were taken away, about which you'll hear a bit more later on. But I want to thank Tim for this idea, which just lodged itself with me. And then we did Revealing the Charterhouse, which, you know, was the creation of a museum and a lot of work in different parts of the building. And when we were coming towards the end of that project, this became the next obvious piece of work to do. So we decided to work on this. We put together an advisory group, and I want to thank all of the people on that group, and I'm not going to list everyone because it would go on too long, but I'm delighted that Flora Lyon, who was on part of that group, is here. I want to particularly also thank Professor Maurice Howard, who I'd worked with at University of Sussex and who is an absolute expert in this field and gave us very sage advice over the period. I'm rather sad that Giles Waterfield, who is also a part of that team, is not here anymore to see how he helped us. And then there was some wonderful support from governors, Sir Michael Graydon, who was our chairman, Wilf Weeks, who was the chairman of the development board, who were also here. We had brothers on the steering group, which was a wonderful thing, and we had staff. Charlie Hobson, who was the master at the time, gave the project the green light, and that support continued under the new master, Anne Kenrick. So then we agreed we'd do it, and we went out to start raising the money. Now, I've just been asked, actually, how that was. I think if a project is really good, the funds are there, and you just have to go out and get them. So it wasn't incredibly onerous. We were really helped at an early stage by the National Lottery Heritage Fund, who stepped in and were supportive. Then there are a whole other group of people. And there's the Deborah Loeb Bryce Donor Advised Fund based in America. There's the Lyon family, who were very supportive, the Sackler Trust, the Schroeder Foundation. So those are kind of the big donors, and I hope I haven't missed anyone. I know I've missed the Fall Foundation, actually, which I really shouldn't have done. But then there were a whole bunch of other people, right down to brothers who helped us by literally paying for the work we needed to do on individual window panes. So it was a great campaign and brought everyone together, and we were very happy about that. We appointed, or the steering group, and a small group of us on that steering group appointed Richard Griffiths, who's the designer for this, and you'll hear from Richard later on. We had some wacky ideas before we appointed Richard. One of them was, mindful of Elizabeth I and her place in the history of this room, one of the competitors in that competition had the idea of creating a little dais onto which a fake throne that Elizabeth I might have sat in would have been built, and over which there would be a canopy, rather like you might see actually in the throne room in St James's Palace. They didn't get the job, partly because actually it wasn't very practical as well. Anyway, there were lots of discussions with the design group before we appointed Richard and during that process, and then we got on with it. Richard began designing. We had input again from our advisors, and some very good input, by the way, not just on the designs, but on the programme around that from the National Lottery Heritage Fund. We then got into construction. There were some rather lovely adventures on the way. I went with William Fuller, who was the main contractor, and James, one of the the project architect. I think you'll hear more about this, but we had a fabulous day and night in Wales. When you come here, and it's very difficult to see this now, but when you come here, the floor is absolutely magnificent. And we went to a place where we sourced this oak. And one thing I want to say, because I've heard what James has to say, which is about chopping down the oak trees, they were sustainably knocked down. These were trees that had to come down because they were dying, or what have you. These aren't trees that we just thought, oh, we're going to take those bits of oak. The other thing that is stunning, I think, when you come in, and I think we don't want to overlook it, are the paintings. Absolutely fabulous work from Jim Diamond, who has transformed this collection of very dull and some rather damaged 17th century and early 18th century works, and has really brought them to life, which I think is a marvellous thing, against this background of the green silk moire, which you'll hear more about again later on, so I don't want to do it. But I also want to say that one of, I think, the biggest challenges for this space is lighting. Those of you who were more familiar with the room before will know that it was never satisfactory in this room, and it now is really subtle and really beautiful. And it picks up the gilt and everything very well. I think it's done a wonderful job, and that's a chap called Graham Fechtenstein, who I used to work with many years ago at the Almeida Theatre when I worked in the theatre, so it's rather lovely that he's done that. There's one more person I want to mention before we move on, and that is Cathy Ross, who joined the Charterhouse team when she was still working at the Museum of London. And when I say joined the team, she's just been a great rock and an advisor, and she's been an absolute marvellous person for us all. I know that I've forgotten other people: Alex Adey, Alice Woolvey, Ellie Darton-Moore, Cynthia, Adebayo Edu, all these people who helped, and many others, and I apologise to you for not getting your name in here. But I think I've probably gone on rather too long. The people we're going to hear from now, first of all, is Richard Griffiths and James, who are the architectural team. So we've got a little video of them.
When I was appointed as architect for the beautification of the Great Chamber, I was very conscious that the project was as much about converting the Great Chamber into a picture gallery and to equip it to serve as a room for functions and events than it was to, in any sense, restore it to a particular period. This would not, in fact, have been possible in any case, because the room, although it appears coherent, is in fact the product of many different periods. The surviving feature of Lord North's house, the great chimney piece and overmantel in the middle in black and gold, and then the ceiling added by the Duke of Norfolk, And then in the 1830s, for the Charterhouse itself, the addition by Bloor of the deep cornice and the dado. And then the fire in the Second World War, which destroyed the entirety of the interior of the Great Chamber, apart from the fireplace and the ceiling of the alcove, and was then redecorated by Seeley and Paget with wallpaper and tapestries, which were never there historically, at least those particular tapestries. So the question was how to keep the best of these different layers of the old and add a new layer to serve the new purpose. Well, my point of inspiration right the way through the project was the Tudor fireplace, which, being black and gold, was contrasting, to my mind, in an unhappy fashion with the white and gold painted cornice and dado. So my main thought was to tie the room in together architecturally by extending the colour scheme of the fireplace and overmantel around the dado and cornice, and then to fill the space between the two with a rich fabric suitable for showing off paintings. In fact, the dado and cornice are not black, they are a deep blue grey, and you can see that the plinth of the fireplace at the base is a slightly different colour. And so it was that colour that we were matching, and we were highlighting that with a varnish, it's not a gloss paint, and with thin lines of gold leaf in order to pick out the major mouldings and to give a sparkle in the evening when it might be lit by artificial light or even potentially candlelight. So that's the walls. James is going to tell you a bit more about the fabric on the wall. So the next element was the Duke of Norfolk ceiling, which we painted in a white distemper, keeping only the heraldic motifs painted in their heraldic colours. And by contrast, that involved taking away some of the gilding which was already there, but we enhanced the gilding in the alcove, which is perhaps the higher end space of the Great Chamber, and we put on 2 lines of a blue azurite to enhance the appearance and give it the richness which we have to some extent softened on the main room in order to bring it back more like the great chambers and long galleries in Hardwick Hall and other 16th century houses. So in the alcove, we've also extended the panelling, which was already there on one side, to the opposite side as a background for the central portrait of Sutton, who's obviously sitting next door to Queen Elizabeth. Then the floor is new oak floor with wide boards, and again, James will tell you more about those, but the appearance of wide oak boards seemed to me one of those wonderful things about the 16th century that we wanted to keep hold of. And then finally, just about the servicing, that we have hinge hatches in the floorboards to give access to sockets and the things needed to make it work. We have lighting in a track below the ceiling level, which can light the ceiling for reflected light for events. And we have the delicate picture lights over the portraits. So I hope that the sum of all of those things makes a spectacular new space and one which is worthy of the next generation of the Charterhouse's mission.
It was about 5 years ago when I first came to the Charterhouse to work on the project for the museum and the opening of the Charterhouse. And I came up into this room and thought, what an extraordinary space. When will they tackle this next? And was delighted when a couple of years later they decided this was the next great project to bring the public into. What a splendid room it is. We were approached because we'd worked on a master plan for the site to look at this room and think about it as a summer exhibition space and how it could be opened up to the public. What was fascinating about coming into the room was how the furnishings that had been left by Cillian Paget in the 1950s had sort of endured, and it was important to think of a new layer that would endure and age well as the pieces that were here already. We were lucky to work with many different craftsmen. At the beginning of the project, we were asked to approach one of the only and last weaving firms to look at fabrics. I remember the colour decisions around fabric took a long time. There were lots of different opinions that had to be balanced. When it came to the first presentation of our drawings, we suggested a green. I had spoken to Richard, who had approached me as a potential architect to work on the job, and he said, well, what colour would you hang paintings on? And I had remembered back to a trip I had done in one of the great papal estates, a series of galleries where portraiture had been displayed on green because the green tones were there underneath the flesh tones, and the green perfectly counterbalanced that. So I said green would be a nice idea, but what colour green? And the approach to look at a craftsman, see what range they did, and then start working out the colour dyes and mixes was a fascinating one. The firm of Humphreys Weaving, really an extraordinary company, going to its sort of first project in the 1960s, 1970s, and all the way up to date where they've worked on Hampton Court, and they were the natural people to go to. They also had the expertise to advise us on what sort of fabrics would be best suited for a room of this kind. We looked initially at different forms of Ottoman patterns, and one of the first paintings I remember sticking out that had this design was the Ambassadors by Holbein, and both Richard and I looked and thought, God, what a green that would be to see. And we showed it to the Charterhouse, and they were also excited, a Tudor Beethan feel to it. But the feeling is always, what do you do that's modern, as well as what do you take from the best of the old? And we didn't want to do a straight historic style, because that would have led us to accusations of you're setting it back to an 18th century or 16th century or 15th century position. So we looked at ways in which we could take the rich colours that were found in fabrics of that time, but then find a slightly moderner weave. We settled on moire, which is in effect very much like water, hence the name. And the samples we were given made us very excited that this, on a large scale, would be the perfect backdrop to this sort of portraiture. Gold on green, flesh tones and portraiture coming out with that behind it. So we produced a whole set of samples, and then we're given an overview of how it would be made and how it would then be sewn together. And the next task was to find the craftsman who could stitch it and could assemble it. And in this regard, we're very lucky in this country to have still some of the best weavers and upholsterers and wall liners. And we went to a firm up in Yorkshire, called Charles Hesp, who still has it as a family business. And he, fascinating, when he came to site, started talking about his early apprenticeships in the 60s, and how he'd come to have huge respect for country houses, but in fact had begun working on train carriages and had done paint effects to polish up train carriages. So we said, well, that's interesting, because we're looking for various applied finishes to seats and to panelling, and we'd love it if you could also advise on bringing out sort of unusual paint textures. So we looked at things like the reveals for windows, and he suggested all sorts of ways in which you could soften otherwise blank expanses of colour. So Charles was an essential part of the team, and during the whole period of lockdown, it looked like he would be stuck in Yorkshire and the project would grind to a halt. Indeed, for a few weeks it did stop. But fortunately, thanks to the hospitality of a Charterhouse, we were able to bring him and his team to stay here and work with them at a distance on site. And to be beside a craftsman of that type was a huge privilege, and a very rare one, I should say, within modern architecture practice, where most systems are assembled and where you rarely have a chance to talk through a problem. Usually it's to deal with an accusation that you've done something wrong. How is someone going to pay for it? But in this case it was, well, look, this doesn't work. What would you do in this situation? And having that knowledge at first hand was a great bonus of this project. The beginning of the year, we started to look at what the floor finishes should be in the two rooms. We've obviously had a cork found in the withdrawing room, and we decided to leave that as it stood. And in the antechamber, there was quite a lot of the old Baltic oak that we had there, which was in thin boards as laid in the post-war economies. We were thinking of one of the great hallways and galleries where wider boards, which had been available in the Tudor period and the Elizabethan period, were much more prevalent, and the beauty of old oak, which buckles and twists and gnarls and darkens with age, was something we felt was very important as an aging quality within the room. So we started looking for oak suppliers. And when you start looking for oak suppliers, immediately you're taken to the US, to Canada. We were taken all over Europe to look at French oak, and none of it seemed quite right or quite in fitting. It was either too light or it was too brown, and really we wanted English oak, but every supplier we spoke to said the same thing. You won't find wide oak boards any longer. They simply don't exist. The trees don't exist. So we scratched our heads, and it was in conversation with a craftsman called Luke Hughes, a furniture maker and designer, that he suggested, well, I go climbing with a chap who has oak forests and manages those forests, and occasionally takes down trees and saws up the wood, but he's very selective about the projects that he does, so you better approach him gently through me. And this is indeed what we did. And on a trip at the beginning of the year with Dominic and with William Fuller, who at that point had been appointed as the main contractor, we drove up to North Wales to find at the very end of Penrhyn Langath, the valley of the Sacred Hare, the supplier of the oak floor on which I'm currently standing. He has found these oak trees, which some of them up to 700 years old. He carefully stores them, dries them, and then cuts them. And they are an unbelievable width, and it's probably the last floor of this kind that will ever be laid in this country, because I think we used up his final supply. So the floor is the kind of the other great surface in here, and it's the kind of completion that we felt of the great chambers standing as a Tudor-Beethan hall with wide floors, which will, with time grow even more kind of darkened and part of the surroundings in which we're standing. One of the things that the Great Chamber project has taught me, I think, is that architecture isn't a catalogue of parts and pieces. It's a set of relationships that exist, and what makes a great project is great people. And with Fuller's as a building firm that was focused on craftsmanship and brought its best craftsmen to site, we were able to deliver a project of a high craft and artisanal nature that is rare. The relationship between makers, between designers, between the client and the materials themselves, I think, are what come together. And the marks that are left behind by everyone on site, the paintbrush strokes, the planing down of wood, will be here and in this room for generations to come until the next layer.
So that was Richard and James, and I'm glad he mentioned that he had a good relationship with the client, because we thought we had a good relationship with them. as well. And he mentioned the brushstrokes, and what you won't see but you should know about is when we were taking down some of the wall coverings in this room, we found brush marks left by the last series of decorators and painters who'd worked on it in the 1950s for Seeley and Paget. So it's absolutely true that this is an ongoing project. We've now got two more films, one from another wonderful collaborator who's worked with me and others here for some time, Ibi Lanfear, who's going to be talking about the paintings. This talk comes from some research she's done. You should know that we have a book in preparation, which will be published. I mean, we've all written our bits, so it just needs to be put together now, and it's with the designer. And Ibi has a fantastic chapter in that. Ibi's talk is then followed by one given by Ying Yang and by Todd Longstaff Gowan. Now, Ying is the artist who made another wonderful addition to this room, which is a painting which you'll hear more about. And Todd is just a marvellous person who, one of the most cultured and knowledgeable people that I know, who, as well as designing Charterhouse Square, is a great collector of art and hugely knowledgeable. So I think you'll enjoy those two films, I hope anyway, and I'll hand you over to them now.
Good evening, everyone. Firstly, I'm really sad not to be in the Great Chamber altogether, celebrating the opening of the Charterhouse's very own portrait gallery. I've been absolutely blown away by the transformation of both the paintings and the newly restored Great Chamber. And as I speak to you, I hope you'll be able to imagine yourself surrounded by the paintings, and you'll be able to visit in person in the not too distant future. These paintings have played quite a big part in my life over the last few years. When I was first invited to see them, they were hanging high on the walls of the Great Hall, or tucked away in the shadows of the Great Chamber, shrouded in layers of dust and almost impossible to see clearly. And very little was really known about them, beyond a seemingly implausible rumour that linked them directly to the Duke of Monmouth. And they came across as a rather sad, disparate handful of paintings, obscure portraits of obscure sitters, dusty dukes and, dare I say it, slightly boring bishops. But maybe it was the rumour, or maybe it was the glint of something beautiful under the dust on the Earl of Shaftesbury, or maybe it's just because I'll always stick up for an underdog. But I thought there was something really intriguing about them, and I could see that Dominic thought so too. So after a little while, we managed to secure a Paul Mellon grant, which meant that I could spend a very happy year in the Charterhouse archives researching their history. And what quickly became apparent was that these weren't just any old portraits. The dukes weren't really dusty, and actually the bishops were far from boring. These were portraits of Charterhouse governors and a master from the Restoration era, powerful men who between them changed the course of British history, and whose portraits, from the studios of the most illustrious painters of the day, formed the decorative centrepiece in the long gallery of the master's house in what was then Britain's richest charity. Fashionably proclaiming the material wealth of Sutton's Hospital, the paintings also symbolised the status, power and allegiance to the monarchy, both of their sitters and the institution. And you really only had to scratch the surface, or more accurately type Charterhouse portraits into Google Books, to realise that these neglected paintings had once formed the backbone of a celebrated portrait collection that from the early 18th century to the mid-20th was visited and written about by academics, artists and visitors to London. Kneller's beautiful portrait of Thomas Burnet, which is signed and dated 1693, was singled out particularly for praise. Kneller was known to be close friends with Burnet, and the sensitivity with which this work is painted is perhaps a testament to this. The painting was exhibited nationally at least twice in its history. However, in recent decades, seems to have fallen entirely from public and academic consciousness. And it became apparent that the obscure fate of this work really mirrored that of the rest of the collection. And a central question of the research came to be, how did a well-known and celebrated group of portraits, rich in institutional and wider cultural history, sustain such a dramatic fall from public grace? Well, eventually I did come across the answer in a master's report dated the 19th of May 1941, and he wrote, "I regret to inform the Assembly that on the morning of Sunday, May the 11th, the bulk of the ancient buildings of Charterhouse were burned by enemy action." And he goes on to report the events of a harrowing night in which brothers, masters and masters' wives worked alongside the fire brigade to tackle an inferno which spread unrelentingly from the preacher's house to the master's house to the registrar's and eventually to the great hall and staircase. And the master continued, "Everybody worked to salvage whatever was possible. A good deal was saved, but of course a great deal was lost owing to the rapidity with which the fire spread." And remarkably, the full-length portraits, these enormous paintings now dominating the great chamber, were saved by the brothers and the master's wives. But then they were sent away for safekeeping, and they weren't to return to the Charterhouse for another 16 years, by which time any knowledge surrounding the collection had been lost. So, in the history of these portraits, this evening is really quite a moment. For the first time since 1941, they're once again hanging together as a collection, as they did in the original master's house from the 17th century until 1941. And I really hope that, reunited as they are with their institutional and wider historical significance, they can once more illustrate what was perhaps the golden age of the Charterhouse. Thank you.
So, Ying, we're in the Great Chamber at Charterhouse, one of the truly great rooms of this period, Elizabethan age in London, recently restored. And this room has a fantastic history, as you know. First created by Lord North in the 16th century, and then done up by the Duke of Norfolk. And in fact, there's some very interesting bits of decoration that survived from that period. Although the room was badly bombed in 1941, we still have some decoration which showed his allegiance to the Catholic Queen, Mary Queen of Scots, the evil sister of Queen Elizabeth I. And so that's a little souvenir on the thing here. So it's really quite interesting, of course, that your wonderful copy of the Civ portrait in Siena now is now here in this great chamber. And just so that people know, Civ portrait is a rather rare portrait. There are other Civ portraits of other monarchs, I think, but this one refers to the Queen as a Vestal Virgin, who was bound to chastity. The Civ is a symbol of eminent discernment and intelligence. And it shows her here holding the Civ, and it's a remarkable portrait insofar as it's, again, quite rare and an interesting representation. It's said that the portrait was painted as a thanksgiving that the Queen didn't marry a Frenchman because she was being courted by the Duc d'Alençon. Right. And various courtiers were quite angry at the prospect there might be a Catholic queen. Yes. So they, when she decided that it wasn't good enough, she remained a virgin, a Vestal Virgin, of course, and the portrait was painted as a sort of souvenir of this fantastic moment when England was saved again from the assaults of the Catholics and the French. So I think it'd be really great if you could just tell us something about this really extraordinary portrait, which most people won't know because there are lots of likenesses of the Queen. We've seen many over the last few years, but this one is quite unusual. And tell us how you saw it the first time and how you went about copying it.
Right. I saw it first time was in Siena, National Gallery in Siena. And first impression I had, because I never knew, as you say, this portrait exists. because there are many Elizabeth's first portrait in England that we normally know of, but this one somehow sort of missed my radar for whatever the reason. Yes, exactly. I see other portraits with the sieve, but not this particular one. So when the first time I saw it, I mean, it's extraordinary because it was from a conservation point of view. It's in a very good condition because if you think about more than 500 years, through all the throughout the history of the war, there's all sorts of disasters still in that condition. So I was quite surprised to see such good quality picture exist, and to me it's a new discovery.
It's wonderful, because I was in Siena only last month and I remember seeing it. I think they'd moved it since you were there, because you had to see it in some special chamber, because you're in the middle of coronavirus, and they very happily let you in.
Oh, I see. Which
was rather nice, but now it's displayed on the staircase.
Yes.
It's the last painting you see in the cycle as you go all the way around the whole museum. It's still there. But so when you went there, though, I think they opened the gallery for you especially, and you were you had a security guard to make sure you didn't pinch it or scratch it or damage it, and then you started your process of recording it, because you had to come back to London to paint it. But just tell us what that process is, because it is rather extraordinary, and how you paint as well, because I know you paint in the traditional French academic way, which most people don't do. You layer paint over a succession of months, and so it's quite a different process from most people who now make copies of pictures where they just almost, I'd say, not paint by number, but they do paint blobby things and just paint the picture rather than build a picture up as the artist might have originally done so. So please tell us your procedure in a nutshell.
Well, in a nutshell, is normally if I copy something, especially old master or even modern master, I would like to have a original in my studio. So you copy direct from the picture. Whereas in this case, I couldn't, because it's not the original, not even in England. So I had to travel there, as you said, because they closed for probably 8 months, renovate the gallery. Initially, they refused me to have access. Only after Tim Knox, he wrote me a very good reference to explain what Charterhouse was about.
So people don't know Tim Knox, director of the Royal Collection, so he presumably had he opened the door for the Queen.
He opened the door for the Queen. He has, the weight to talk to the head curator of the National Gallery in Siena. So and eventually they have become very friendly. So initially they say you only have 2 hours. They give me 2 hours, and they open the gallery particular for me 2 hours. But when I was there, they become very friendly. So they have a conservator there help me to get the picture out to the gallery into the office, have a nice daylight. They bring the conservation lighting for me just in case not enough. So to me, I felt quite honored, as somebody, all the way from China come to England now. I was seeing, in Italy with this, magnificent picture, placed in a place just for me to study. So I was quite moved by the whole thing. And so the procedure was, since I couldn't have the picture in my studio, I need to study it thoroughly. So I need to write all the things I have seen, the feeling I had when I stand in front of the picture. Because that's very important as an artist. You have to have that feeling. And quite often that feeling can, after you move, it goes away. So you have to write down everything. And technically is, although I took lots of photographs, but the photograph, even the modern sort of a computer image color, they just different from the actual color. So what I did was I took color, I made a color chart. So basically, I will match the exact color from the original.
Which I've seen in your studio. It's extraordinary. It's hundreds of colors.
Yes. So the idea is, since I couldn't have the original, at least I have that's probably the second best of the reference of the color, and especially how transparent, which layer is on what color, this kind of reference. So I get the actual color and the reference, write it all down. So I have, so both mentally, I have a picture in my head. Physically, I have something direct take from the original for me to work. I don't know how many miles away in England, in London, in my studio. So that's how I go about.
As I was saying earlier, what's unusual about the way that you copy paintings too is that you learned in that French, Russian academic way, where you build up a picture from scratch. So you layer and layer and build up the image as you're going along. So it's very important then to get all those layers right, isn't it? To get all the washes so that you build up the image slowly over time. So it's an accretion. And that's so extraordinary. And it is an amazing painting. And look at it now.
Oh, thank you.
It's so much better. It looks better than the original.
No, it can't.
Also, compared to many of the pictures in this room, I think a copy is so much better than many of the 17th century or 18th century copies actually in the Charterhouse. So it's really a testament to your great ability to do this. But it is an extraordinary thing and also beautifully framed, must be said, because I think it was decided from the beginning too, wasn't it?
Yes.
The frame was agreed very early on, so it was this idea that there was this beautiful marriage from the very beginning, and the whole idea of where it would sit and the light and everything was all considered from the very beginning. So, but it's a stupendous thing. And so, can also just give a rough idea how long did you have for this commission? In fact, after you came back from Siena, you made all your notes and things and had a wonderful time, I'm sure. There.
Yes, I did.
So you came back, and how long did you have, in fact, to create the picture, and what was the process afterwards?
I had about a year to work on it. So I spent roughly about 12 months. When I say 12 months, it's not every day, constantly. Because, picture this age during the 16th century, and even before that, even from the Renaissance, all these old masters, the special technique they use is glazing, which is kind of a sort of disappeared since the Impressionists. When the Impressionists started, the new material, new paints start to appear on the market. Artists start going out into the nature, paint direct onto the canvas. So somehow the whole, since Impressionists, not many people interested in this technique. Whereas in old days, that's the only technique. Everybody have different styles, but that's the only technique. It's like a principal technique throughout from, probably from Van Eyck, to, to like a Turner or, Constable. Constable still, there are some kind of technique. It's not as much as like old master like a Titian, but still it's form of glaze. So you glaze one paint. For Constable, probably thicker paint, layer of paint on top of another, whereas old master, they use very thin, transparent glaze. So to me, for this kind of work, is sort of you do need a layer. Each layer, before you glaze on them, you have to wait for them to dry. So you have to plan ahead at different stages. So to me, there is this kind of waiting as well. But I think it's quite important because nowadays, today's culture is everything quick. Everything, if you want it, we can get it, aligned.
No, that's true. And I think it's very interesting also that the Charterhouse decided to go and to embark on a painting. There's so many mechanical means now of copying pictures.
Yes, exactly, modern ways.
Some are very good, but I must say that in looking at a painting just has vitality that a very high quality copy never has. It just has it's painterly in a way, and it's real pigment built up over us.
Yes.
And it has. When you get close, you can discern the quality of picture because you can read through the layers. Where on a photograph or any of those kind of reproductions, you can't quite do that. So I think it has an extraordinary quality to it. I think that so I encourage everyone, when they're able to come to Charterhouse, and you won't be here to explain, they can refer back to your conversation, but I think this idea of this being this wonderful new copy and of gracing one of the great rooms in central London is really going to be a wonderful asset for the Charterhouse. So thank you so much.
No, at all. Thank you.
An enormous thank you to Dominic, without whom none of this would have happened, and for his vision, which has become this glorious reality. Thank you to our speakers this evening, who have each played a different but equally important role and contributed their expertise to the project. There are many others too numerous to mention, and we thank you too. It has been really, really fascinating and inspiring to hear each of them recount their own experience of this very special endeavour. I'd like now to introduce our chairman, Major General Andrew Ritchie, who is speaking to us from his home in Wiltshire. Andrew.
Like everyone, I had so hoped to be present in person at the reopening of the Great Chamber. But for reasons we all understand, you find me instead in my house in Wiltshire. I would like to begin by paying tribute to Anne Kenrick and the staff of the Charterhouse, all the staff of the Charterhouse, for the wonderful work they've been doing throughout the period of this dreadful pandemic. Their commitment to the brothers and to the wider community has been truly inspirational. So well done, the team, and my very best wishes to you for the months that lie ahead. I was extremely lucky to be shown around the completed chamber by Dominic Tickell just a few weeks ago, and I can assure you that its beautification is even more glorious when seen with the naked eye. The room has probably never looked more splendid in all its long history. The credit for the success of the project rests very largely with Dominic, and it is about him that I wish to say a few words. For this event marks his departure from the Charterhouse after almost 10 years as its development director. It has been a period of significant and beneficial change, and Dominic has been at the heart of that change. Those who know best what Dominic has achieved are the governors who worked most closely with him over the years, Lord Glenarthur, Baroness Andrews and Wilf Weeks in particular. They have permitted me to draw on their tributes in these remarks. It was clear from an early association with Dominic that he was a strong champion of the Charterhouse. He was closely captivated by the charity and its remarkable history. He recognised that it was right for this history to be more widely known. And when the Revealing the Charterhouse enterprise was embarked upon, it was Dominic's dynamism which helped create the ideas for its fulfilment. As a student of history and the arts, he was able to bring context and perspective to bear in the deliberations of the governors. He was instrumental in connecting a wider group of influential individuals to become enthusiasts for the Charterhouse. His guided tours covered religion, architecture, the monarchy, murder, mayhem, and much else. And no two commentaries of his were ever quite the same. Drawing on his extensive contacts at the Museum of London, the City of London, and elsewhere, he worked imaginatively with specialists to plan and then execute the design of the new entrance, the museum, and the Learning Centre, and to redesign Charterhouse Square. He was meticulous throughout the process in ensuring authenticity and integrity of craftsmanship. In parallel, Dominic was a passionate advocate of our case for funding support with the Heritage Lottery Fund and other potential donors. That the HLF and individuals have been so generous is a tribute to his enterprise and his commitment. His final project has, of course, been the Great Chamber. Its complete transformation in all its historical and artistic glory is surely his greatest contribution, a mark of his skills as a development director and of his enthusiasm for all that makes the Charterhouse what it is. One governor remarked that without Dominic's infectious delight and pride in the Charterhouse, they would not have become involved. He charmed and informed so many people with his vision of an institution which needed to be better understood and its heritage more widely shared, without losing in any way its characteristic serenity and, above all, its principal purpose as a home to the brothers. Dominic has forged many friendships here, especially amongst the brothers. His achievements have both revealed the past and helped secure the future. He has been a true benefactor of the Charterhouse, and, as in Shelley's Ozymandias, we will look on his works and celebrate what he achieved.
Thank you, Andrew. And finally, I have a last but very important task to perform. We would all like, once again, to thank Dominic Tickell for making this wonderful project happen. And I would like to present you, Dominic, with a little gift, this specially commissioned designed pottery bowl to recognise your immeasurable contribution to the charity. Dominic, thank you.
It's got my name on. That's very nice. Thank you very much. And I hope people will indulge me on this both joyful and somewhat sad occasion for me, because when I leave tonight. I saw the brothers this afternoon. We had them in for a cup of tea, and I'm glad to say some bubbles. And I was able to tell them the truth, which was that when I first came here, it was a rather puzzling place to enter. At that time, it actually was very different, and it took me a while to sort of work it out. It was eccentric, and it needed a bit of a stir up, if you like, not least because the governors, having endured 2008 and the big financial hit that had given the Charterhouse, they wanted to start getting some money for the first time in from other philanthropists. And I came. I was working for a day and a half or 2 days. I can't remember what it was per week for a while, and over the time I became full time. And I remember Julia, who's my fabulous and lovely wife, saying to me when I said I was going to go and do some work for that. My order book wasn't completely full at the time. And she said, "Oh, you're going to have to work for that funny place, aren't you?" And she reminded me of this about sort of 6 months later, when I came back brimming full of enthusiasm after a particularly fun day. And I sort of smiled and said, "It's true." And I've been thinking quite a lot what it is about the Charterhouse that gives you that, and the things that Andrew so kindly just said are absolutely right. It's the history, it's the story, it's the revealing, it's all of that kind of stuff. But actually, it's something else. It's something very different. It's something that people, when they come here, experience when they come through the gates. And I don't want to go off on a flight of fancy, but I've just read a really brilliant book by a chap called, his brilliant name as well, Merlin Sheldrake. And it's called Entangled World, and it's about fungus. Now, if that doesn't get you going, I don't know what will, but it is the most fantastic book. And I was particularly struck in one chapter when he's talking about lichens and how lichen gets into stone and becomes part of stone. What happens here, I think, is that kindness has got into the stone. It's when Thomas Sutton set the Charterhouse up in 1611, he was a rather strange guy, and who knows what his motivations were. But whatever they were, he created something rather magical and very special. And this place has been a shelter and a nurturing heart, really, for generation after generation of elderly people who have required and deserved that kindness and support. So really what I want to say just before I do what I said I was going to do and kind of start walking is that kindness cannot be underestimated. It's here, it's going to be coming out of those walls, and I encourage you all to come and look after it and experiencing it when you can. And thank you to everyone and for everyone's kind words. I'm going to take this away with me.
Thank you. Thank you, Dominic, for those moving and very true words. I think they resonate with all of us who work here, with all of the people who support the Charterhouse, and long may that continue. All that remains for me now is to thank the Lord Mayor, thank all our speakers, and thank you, the audience, for joining us, and to thank you also for your terrific support, which is really so much appreciated, especially in these challenging times. I look forward immensely to welcoming you to stand where we are this evening in person and to enjoy this fantastic space. Much more information will be coming soon, and if you don't already, please do subscribe to our newsletter so that you can be kept up to date. The links will be coming up at the end of this broadcast, and it will update you on our progress and other online events prior to opening up our doors again. So, absolutely finally, I will hand you over with many thanks to Elizabeth Pion, who will now play us out and capture a little of the historic atmosphere. And many thanks to the Worshipful Company of Musicians for enabling this to conclude this splendid evening. We very much hope to see you soon. Thank you and good night.